It's great to welcome back to the program today Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, who's a staff reporter with the Oregonian in Portland. You might remember that he recently joined us to talk about a story that he's been following for some time now involving Saudi nationals who, in the United States, are accused of crimes, sometimes arrested, and they disappear. And he'll tell us what we mean by disappear specifically before they actually face justice. So, Shane, first of all, great to have you back on. Catch us up on what we discussed last time to get everybody up to speed, if you will.
David, thanks so much for having me back on your show. So as you mentioned, for the last few months, I've been working on an investigative series here at the Oregonian, looking into cases where Saudi nationals, most of them attending university here in the United States, have been charged with serious crimes ranging from manslaughter to rape to possession of child pornography. And these individuals, a growing number of them, have managed to disappear while facing prosecution. Essentially, these individuals have been charged with crimes. They end up posting bail, have been retained private attorneys, and then as they're moving close to trial, a number of these individuals suddenly go missing, and a number of them we've been able to track back to Saudi Arabia.
So some of the questions I asked you last time, and the answers were some form of, we're looking into that, include, what do we know about what American authorities know about this? What do we know about the sort of financial or sort of socio-political status of these individuals in Saudi Arabia, and sort of to try to understand the contours of what may be going on. What have you learned as your investigation has continued since we last talked about this?
Yeah, a good place to sort of start with that question is to just sort of state out front that what got us looking into these cases originally was a single case here in Portland where we learned that federal law enforcement who looked into a Saudi national here in Portland who disappeared before his manslaughter trial in 2017, federal law enforcement concluded that they believed the Saudi Arabian government had played a role in orchestrating this individual's escape from prosecution. This individual was picked up in a black SUV outside of his home. He cut his ankle monitor, and then federal law enforcement believe he was given an illicit passport and possibly smuggled out of the United States on a private plane. So that's what got us looking into whether or not there are other cases like this one here in Oregon and around the country. And in the last few months, we have now documented nearly 30 cases where similar circumstances have unfolded. And so one of the questions we've been raising from the beginning is whether or not the Saudi Arabian government might be involved in more of these escapes, and also the question of, has the U.S. government known about this? And in answer to your question, our most recent story that came out 2 weeks ago in partnership with ProPublica, the nonprofit investigative news website, who helped us on this most recent story, we found that the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have, since around 2008, known about these Saudi Arabian students disappearing from the United States and had identified Saudi operatives here in the U.S. that had helped a number of these students escape from the U.S.
Is there anything that you've uncovered so far? So, okay, to be clear, American authorities became aware of some of these cases. Presumably, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, we believe after the fact, not as these individuals were facing prosecution.
Correct. What we were able to find is that back in 2008, analysts with the Department of Homeland Security began looking into a number of cases that had come to their attention where Saudi nationals, mostly college students, were charged with crimes and then were disappearing from the United States. So they began looking into this phenomenon and quickly determined that they believed that members of the Saudi Arabian government working through the Saudi Cultural Mission in Washington, D.C., were assisting these suspected criminals, facilitating their escape from the United States. And there was actually a report on this produced by the Department of Homeland Security back in 2008, which they then gave to the FBI. But it appears that that report was never distributed more widely throughout the intelligence community here in the U.S. And what we also learned through our reporting is that this issue has come up time and time again on the radars of federal law enforcement officials in the FBI, Homeland Security. The State Department has been aware of this, yet nobody in the U.S. government has really taken up the issue seriously.
Now, there's no reason to believe at this point in time that there's any American complicity in this, right? Or at least at this point in time, you've not found evidence of that. Is that correct?
Well, what do you mean by complicity?
Well, I don't know. What should I mean? In other words, is there anything you've uncovered so far that suggests that, given that there is no extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia, given that many of these individuals have or are able to get access to resources to get out that don't involve commercial flights and they involve, potentially false passports, do you have any reason to think that American authorities are aware of the potential flight risk of some of these individuals as the cases are unfolding and either look the other way or even potentially assist in getting them out of the country?
That's actually a really great question, David. And I think at this time, we don't have a real clear understanding on that matter. What we can say is that, this has been an issue that's been on the radar of the federal law enforcement for up to a decade. They knew that this was happening. And, it appears that during that time period where a number of these individuals were escaping justice in the United States, the U.S. government never made an issue about it or even confronted the Saudi Arabian government, an ally of the U.S., about this issue.
Do you have, what are the logistics at the sort of individual case level? In other words, do you have reason to believe that the Saudi individuals know in advance that if you get into trouble, here's who you have to call? Is it that, where is the bail money coming from? Are they getting themselves bailed out and later contacting Saudi assistance? Or is this something that the Saudi consulate, for example, might be handling from the beginning? What do you know about those details?
Right. So I think to answer that question, the first thing that we have to sort of point out or illustrate is that there has been a tremendous influx in the number of Saudi students studying in the United States in the last decade plus, starting in about 2005. Most of these students in the U.S. Are recipients of a government scholarship program by the Saudi Arabian government. And one of the things that we learned and kind of had already known about before this latest story came out, but that the Saudi government keeps very close tabs on all of their students who are studying here in the United States. I mean, it appears that through the Saudi Cultural Mission, they sort of have a large surveillance program to keep an eye on students just to make sure that, A, they're staying out of trouble, or that they're not engaging in political activity, or that they're, not talking to the wrong people, et cetera, et cetera. So our understanding is that the Saudi government has pretty close tabs on most of their students, and so are able to find out pretty quickly when some of them have gotten into serious legal trouble. In almost all of the cases that we've documented to date, after an individual gets jailed on suspicion of whatever crime, the Saudi Arabian government, as a policy, and they've told us this explicitly, as a policy, will post the bail money for any individual, any citizen of theirs accused of a crime in the United States, and then also provide money for legal representation, so they don't have a public defender or something like that. So in some of these cases, the Saudis have put up substantial sums of money for these individuals accused of crimes. We're talking six-figure sums of bail money that's put up by various consulates Saudi consulates here in the U.S. Many of the ones we've looked at here in Oregon, because we've documented a number of cases here, that's come from the closest consulate to us in Oregon is the Saudi Arabian consulate in Los Angeles.
So you mentioned some items that were told to you about how this works from Saudi authorities, but have they answered any direct questions about the fact that some of these individuals are disappearing and evading justice, or have they not answered questions related to that?
It's been a little difficult getting detailed explanations from the Saudi embassy in Washington, which has been sort of our main point of contact throughout this series. But they have sort of given a blanket denial that their government has helped anybody or any Saudi citizen break U.S. laws and escape prosecution in the United States.
Are there any explanations for any parts of this? I mean, in total, it seems very hard that this would apply, but are there any parts of this that if we said, let's be less cynical, skeptical, whatever term you want to apply, that there is some kind of innocent explanation for some parts of this?
Well, I think maybe the most, if we could even call it an innocent explanation, I think it's a matter of maybe there is that the Saudi Arabian government has very little faith in the U.S. Criminal justice system, or there might be a sort of ingrained belief, especially after 9/11, that Arab men in the U.S. who are accused of certain crimes are not going to get a fair shake in the U.S. criminal justice system. And, instead of taking a chance of going to trial and facing years in prison, they're making the decision to help these individuals escape and return to Saudi Arabia. That could be the most innocent explanation, but it would still require a foreign government, an ally of the United States, subverting the U.S. justice system and also violating a number of U.S. and international laws.
Has the Trump administration been presented with this? I know you've been in touch with some senators, and if so, what have they said about it?
Well, at this point in time, it's abundant. It is explicitly clear that the Trump administration does know about our reporting and our findings. Senators in Washington have raised this question multiple times with various agencies in the Trump administration. They've responded finally after ignoring a number of our questions and queries throughout this process, because we've written more than a dozen stories on this now. So they're aware of this. They're aware of our findings, and they're aware that we now know that the U.S. government, prior to the Trump administration, has known about this, both in the George W. Bush administration and under President Barack Obama. However, now that this has been revealed, it's sort of in the Trump administration's court to do something about it or choose not to do anything. And at this point in time, it doesn't appear, based on everything we know, that they're particularly interested in raising this issue.
Yeah, I mean, this now starts to get more into Saudi-U.S. relations, but there is this question, which I mentioned, of an extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia, which is not currently in place. Imagining that was put in place, would that mostly preempt the utility of getting these individuals out to Saudi Arabia, or would that only deal with part of the issue?
Well, I think that, the idea of the Saudi Arabian government agreeing to an extradition treaty with the United States is just, not even an idea worth entertaining. It's never going to happen. But clearly, without an extradition treaty, once these individuals are able to get out of the United States and return home, there is really no mechanism in place to have these fugitives brought back to the U.S. unless they end up going to a country where the U.S. has an extradition treaty. Say one of these individuals goes back home to Saudi Arabia and then several years later decides to go on a vacation in Europe somewhere. They could get picked up and extradited back to the U.S. that way. But otherwise, if they get back to Saudi Arabia, for the time being, there seems to be little the U.S. can do if they don't want to apply political or diplomatic pressure on the Saudis. and at the up until now, they've chosen not to do that.
Yeah, and no indication, as you're suggesting, that that piece is going to change anytime soon. Really
Well,
excellent.
I mean, I
Yeah.
say more with that point there. I mean, the State Department, in a letter to Senator Ron Wyden, who's a senator from Oregon, who was asking the State Department about all of these Saudis disappearing and returning home. The State Department wrote Wyden a letter a couple of months ago and essentially said that there was nothing that they could do about this. They basically said it was a law enforcement issue, not a diplomatic issue, which is false, because the State Department, there's a number of things the State Department could do on this particular issue. But, the sort of implication from the letter was that they weren't going to do anything.
We've been speaking with Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, staff reporter with the Oregonian in Portland, Oregon. Shane, really appreciate you getting us up to speed and continue the good work on this.
I really appreciate your interest in this issue, David.